Alright, so I'm gonna try something new for a change. I'm going to play while I give my thoughts on something and see if that's a good different video type. So, I had a thought about Contenders recently, and it has to go back to basically what I have been told so far and what I know. So, OWL is mandated salaries for players, benefits, all the good things in life. Contenders is supposed to be the feeding system for OWL. Everybody's goal is supposed to be OWL. You get to OWL, once you get to OWL, you are set, basically. You have your pay, you have a good support staff, you have an org to support you, you can grow your brand, you can do all those things. But basically what happened with Overwatch over the last few months is all the endemic orgs and all the people who were paying players got forced out because of the franchising rule. Okay, I can accept that. Orgs want security, it's not that big of a deal. They want to have the stability and they're investing a lot of money. They want security in the fact that nothing bad is going to happen to that investment, which I can understand. So we have franchising. Franchising means that no matter where you finish in the standings, whether you're the New England Patriots, 5-time Super Bowl champions, or you are the Cleveland Browns, who haven't won anything substantial in I don't know how many years, you can't get relegated out of the league. You are protected. So what does that mean? That means that an org, as long as it is somewhat marketable, the org is protected. What does that mean for players? Players in that org are still getting paid. They're still getting benefits that are mandated by the league. They're still getting everything they need to somewhat have a successful career. Granted, you're not going to want to get drafted by the Cleveland Browns, but hey, you get to play in the NFL. So, let's look at the catch-22 of this. What happened to the endemics and everybody in Contenders? They have no chance of getting into OWL unless there's an expansion. Because of that, they don't see a reason to be in the market until an expansion is announced or available. There's no reason to. So, that means all the endemics who had aspired to be in OWL are now gone. They are no longer paying, they aren't developing talent, they aren't putting a structure in place. There's nothing really in Contenders outside of OWL teams that are creating academy teams. So let's look at OWL academy teams. What is the purpose of an academy team in OWL? An academy team is used to develop talent outside of your organization. So it's sort of like having an AHL team or a minors team. Somebody you control who's on, you control how you develop the talent. Basically, you're setting them up to fit into your organization, but they can go to other people. If you have a good investment in a player, you can effectively use that player to get money. You can get your financials back, and because you can get your financials back, it also means that you can recoup losses. If you invest heavily in a kid you think is going to be your star player, you know, you can sell him to the Cleveland Browns per se, and you can make money off of his contract. Well, that leads us to an interesting question for academy teams and everybody who owns these contender slots. So Contenders does have relegation. Contenders does have trials. So that's what forces Contenders teams to try. But here's another question. What forces Contenders teams to pay players at all? How do we have any way, shape, or form the ability to know that Contenders players, the feeding in system of OWL, are going to get taken care of. We don't. We actually have no way to secure this and make sure it's proof. As far as I know, Contenders doesn't have a mandated salary. It doesn't have mandated benefits. And to play in Contenders is probably the only real form of competition and your only chance to get into OWL. So that means that you effectively have to submit to a Contenders team. The Contenders team does not have to play you. You could be Crusher99, the best player in the world, and if you don't want to play ball with the Contenders teams, it hurts your chances of getting into OWL exponentially. Granted, if you're Crusher99, you're going to have more opportunities and you're probably not going to run into a douchebag. But let's look at what the douchebags have to gain. So if you are a Contenders org and you sign player X to a $500 a month contract so that he has some money, he can put more time into the game, he doesn't have to work. He can develop, he can work on it. And then you sell him as soon as that Contender season, mid-season OWL, Crusher99 gets bought. He signs a $50,000 contract with Org X. That means you as a Contenders organization, or just somebody who owns a Contender slot, because again, I don't know how this works, gets $12,500 because you were the person who owned that player. It's designed to recoup your losses. It's your player has to be allowed to enter OWL. You have to be allowed the opportunity to get something back from losing that player. Well, let's look at it from this perspective. Say I own a Contender slot, and I have Crusher99, Crusher 100, 101, 102, 103. I have 4 people I know are getting into OWL. But I don't have them signed under contract. They're just players I know. They're my friends. They're people who want the opportunity to play in OWL. They want the opportunity to show themselves in Contenders. My roster is still getting raped when all 4 of them get drafted. I am now left with 4 empty roster holes. So that means that I'm entitled to a form of compensation. I'm entitled to that $1,250 that the OWL org has to pay me for the player that they're taking from me. I have no problem with that. But say I'm not paying these players at all. I have no intention whatsoever of paying any players. I'm not an organization. I don't have any financial backing. I can't pay them. So I have no ability to compensate my players, except for with maybe I'm a coach and I own the slot, or maybe it's my slot and I'm letting them play on it, and that's the form of compensation. Is that really worth? So let's look at it from a perspective of, let's say, my org, my Contenders team. My team owns a Contenders slot that I inherited from the first Contenders. So what does that mean? That means that my investment into the players, and I'm a coach, so I'll say that my compensation to them is I coach them. I prep them for OWL, and I sign figuratively, not literally. I don't have a contract with these players, to my organization, and they all get drafted. They all get picked up by orgs. They're all, doing their thing. They all make it into OWL. That means I'm entitled to $12,500 compensation for my time, my quote-unquote investment in the players. But I still retain my Contender slot. The only way I can lose it is through trials. So as long as I can keep producing Crusher 99s, I am just going to keep making money, and I will never lose my Contender slot. So if you have the top tier talent every single time, you're never going to lose your Contender slot. Even if they don't make it into OWL, you are still going to keep your Contender slot. So what's my risk versus the reward I receive for these players making it into OWL? My risk is that I may lose my Contender slot. But because I may lose my Contender slot, my compensation for that is that I get good players because I want them to play. They want to play in Contenders. It's the way to get into OWL. So let's look at it this way. I don't sign any of these players, and my 4 players get sent to OWL. They all get picked up. I make roughly That would be 25,000. I make $50,000 for 4 players. I made $50,000 off 4 players getting picked up and sent to OWL because of the way the system works. So that $50,000 is my compensation for losing those players. But because of that compensation, I still don't have to pay anybody. My compensation, again, that I established is the reward of me coaching them. That's their reward. That's what they get. So, I made $50,000. 4 of my players made it into OWL. I now have to recoup my losses. I now have to make 4 more players. I have to sign 4 more players. I have to get them to the point where they are on a team, they're capable, they're winning, they're doing their thing. So how do I go about getting more players for Contenders? What's the best option I have? I have the allure of a Contender spot, and there are players in open division fighting their way up through trials. The obvious and easiest answer is just to poach players. Poach the people I want. And then I take the quote-unquote Alabama, USC, Oregon, Clemson, those college strategies of we have produced more NFL talent than anybody else. I can get you into OWL. And the player comes to me, and let's say I get, of those 4 slots, I get 2 Crusher 99s, 2 people I know who are going to get into OWL. And then somebody got dropped from OWL, but I know he's really good. He was in OWL. So I pick him up too. So that's 3 players right there. And then I find a 4th one. He doesn't really work out, but he's still there. Add them to my existing players. And I now have my roster again. I'm not paying anyone. There's no money being exchanged. But because I have the allure of that spot, I can continuously do that with my talent. And as talent comes out of OWL, I just recycle it. So if it's somebody who is usable, somebody who can do their job, somebody who can make it back into OWL with a little bit of support structure, or just playing alongside people consistently, they're going to get back into OWL again. Alright, so that was Contenders Stage 1. I lost 4 players. I got 1 former OWL player and 2 Crusher 99s. And, now I'm in a situation where I am slightly worse than I was before, but I've made $50,000. Alright, so I go in, and I don't win Contenders this time, but I put on a really good showing. I do a top 3 finish. I finished top 3 with that roster. My former OWL player gets his second chance. He gets re-signed. Signed as a substitute to another team. That's another $12,000. Let's see. One of my Crusher 99s also gets drafted, but I still have the other one. So I lose 2 players, and I make $25,000. So in a period of 4 months, I've made $75,000. With that $75,000, I still have not paid my players anything. The allure and pure fact that I own a Contender slot assures me that I am going to have that, quote-unquote, feed of players forever. So, let's say I go and I bust this time. I can't get anything. I don't acquire any good talent. I still have my 1 Crusher 99. I have the 1 player who botched out on me. He's not really working out. And then I have the 2 players I originally had. So I have the quote-unquote one-man army team. This point, stage 3 of Contenders, I'm now in a situation where I am most likely going to lose. Let's say I finish last because my Crusher 99 can't hard carry. The meta shifted. He can't do it alone. Alright, so I am now in trials. I take my trials slot and I win. I make it out of trials. I make it to the point where I am not out, but I made it to the point where it's looking grim. So I have to rebuild my roster. But I still have a Contender slot. That trials team that beat me, or almost beat me in that situation looks really tempting. All of them wanted to get into Contenders. They're not going to get into Contenders, though. So, what do? I go and I poach the best players from that roster, and I cut my busts. So, I acquired 2 Mini Crusher 99s from that Trials roster that I poached, because I have a Contender slot and they don't. And then I also have my original Crusher 99, and then my pseudo Crusher 99, and now I've got 2 more talents. So let's say I finish 4th the next Contenders thing. Finally, my Crusher 99 gets his shot. He's gone. He made it. He's out. So I now have $87,500. No, wait, I have that wrong. I don't know how much money I have, but I have a substantial chunk of change for this investment of me coaching them. But because I have the allure of that system and structure, I just refreshed my talent pool. So I have to find a new Crusher. I don't find him. So in a period of, let's say that's roughly 7 months. 7 months has passed since I had my Contender slot. And this is what goes on, and, you know, all this stuff. It's great. It's what goes on, you know, there's nothing really to complain about. There's, you know, I have money, I'm living well, my players are doing better. One day, one of my players comes to me and he goes, "You've made a lot of money. I would like to get paid to be on your roster. I can't do this." As the owner of the Contenders slot, I now have 100% liberty to decide what I want to do with that player. Do I want to be a douchebag? I'm going to go ahead and say I want to be a douchebag. I cut him. Can't have players wanting money. I can't have a rebel rise up and tell me, you know, I need benefits and stuff. So I don't want that player. Damages my reputation a little bit, but I still own the Contenders slot. I own that ability for players to get exposure and play at a high level. I own all of their ability to get better. So in this situation, it does not hurt me at all to be a douchebag. Me being a douchebag is actually extra profitable. I'm going to retain even more money. So, I'm douchebag and I cut my, you know, best player because he wanted money. Whatever. I'm now in a situation where I have to find new talent. I'm going to take this as a lost season because that happened. I'm just going to accept the fact that I'm going to lose this Contenders and I'm going to be in Trials. It's not a problem. Alright, I go into Trials. This time I fail. I get washed out of Trials. Alright. I no longer have the ability to have that allure to force players to want to come to me. But because of what happened, I am up $90,000. I'm just going to say $90,000. In that period of time, I've made $90,000 off of the players while just owning a slot. All I did was own the Contender slot. All I did. And because all I did was own the Contender slot, that's the compensation that's owed to me by the league. Nobody can contest that compensation's owed to me. I gave up my Contender slot security and all of that stuff for that, you know, them getting drafted. That's my compensation. But let's put it this way. What I'm getting at is Contenders orgs, OWL orgs, nobody has an obligation to pay any players in Contenders. Will it get you better talent? Yes. But if you know half a shit of what you're doing, it's not going to matter. If you can evaluate talent and you already own a Contender slot, you are probably going to make in 7 months at least $50,000 just for owning that Contender slot. And it's your quote-unquote consolation prize for missing OWL. So how do we fix the douchebaggery that will be Contenders and the sleight of hand that will happen because, you know, everybody's a douchebag? And let's be honest, it's business. It's all about turning a profit. So if I am going to pay my players, it's going to be something so insubstantial that, you know, it's not going to fucking matter. But there's a potential that I might lose money. So I have to be very, very frugal. So let's say I don't spend any money on my players. I'm still up that money because I owned a Contenders slot. So how do we fix this? They cannot give Contenders slots away. They have to be earned. You cannot invite people to Contenders. You cannot secure Contenders spots by buying them from another organization. Contenders has to be 100% earned. Every single team has a chance to get relegated at the end of the season. Even they need to be very, 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 very strict with how the Contenders spots are handed out. If you have Team X that has 6 players on it, does really well, wins Contenders, and everybody except one person gets picked up, and they all make it to Owl. The last person left is holding the Contender slot. He didn't make it into Owl, but his friends did. Everybody else who was on that team. His consolation prize, because his team is willingly going to give their Contender slot to the last member of their team, is going to be more money than his teammates make. He is going to make, at minimum $60,000 just for his entire team getting poached, because his team owns that Contender slot. It is better almost to not get picked up and just own the Contender slot. There's more risk, but you are almost guaranteed profit and reward. And as long as you cash out once, you don't have to make any financial investment. So there is a huge risk with a massive reward, but when you give away the token to play in the game, you immediately are giving the ability for people to just profit. Fuck, I'm not going to make it into Owl. My teammates did, and I'm really happy for them. I made my $60,000. I'm going to go ahead and reinvest it in streaming, and I'm done. And I'm still going to own that Contender slot. I'm going to be that douchebag I just talked about. You profit. The players on your team don't. They have a shot at Owl. But realistically, that's not the stuff they need to support them. The benefits they need, the stuff they need. So, effectively, the players are at a disadvantage. So, back to how do we fix this? Contenders needs to be a buy-in. Smaller than Owl, but you need to have a Contenders system where there's structure, and it needs to be a mini Owl. You cannot have a minor league that filters in, and this dream of, you know, I'm a solo Q star and I made it with my friends needs to die. Because it leads to corruption and a whole bunch of fucking problems that pros have to deal with. This needs to be 100% tier structure where you play through open, and then through open there is a invite-only all-star game, or however the fuck you want to do it, where you get invited with a chance to play for a Contenders team. They need to have some allure like that, and they need to get away from this corrupt idea of fucking people owning Contender slots, because it's going to get bad. The T2 scene will have no money in it. It will 100% just be the people who own the Contender slots. So let's look at it from a perspective of somebody who's not a douchebag, who isn't hoarding all the stuff. Let's say he takes that money and reinvests it. And you can slightly upgrade every single player. People played Madden. People played NBA 2K. They know how to do this shit. You develop a player. You give them playtime. You get them support structure. They get them the things they need to succeed. Suddenly, they're not, you know, an 80 overall. They're an 85 or a 90 overall. And that might be good enough to be a, you know, a bench warmer. So let's say you make $12,000 off every player. I know it's $12,050 minimum, but I'm just being generous and rounding down. So we'll say $10,000. Every $10,000 you make, you invest $5,000 of it into the team. So that means each player gets $500. You know, you're buying, you know, stuff they need. Maybe you have a boot camp before playoffs. You know, you get everybody together and you do stuff like that. You know, that's your thing. That's your investment. You're expecting a return on it. Doesn't work out. The team fails. It wasn't worth, and you're out money. Why even invest that money in them in the first place? Just to feel good about yourself? That's poor business. Every single businessman will tell you that it's poor business decision to be nice. It's poor decision to give everybody what the fuck they want. It's better to be frugal and stingy as shit and make sure you keep everything profitable and status quo. So, you suddenly now have turned good guy into douchebag. There is a huge problem with the way Contenders is structured. They need to make it so that it's buy-in, it's some form of situation where the people who own the slots aren't at an advantage. They aren't financially ahead of everybody else. Because at one day, you could just cut your entire roster. That roster has no security. Your roster gets cut. They're all going to get poached to death because they're not on your roster anymore if they're any good. But they have no security. You can just lose. You guys aren't doing up to par. I'm going to replace you all. There's no rules as far as I know that say that can't happen. If there's a roster lock, all right. After the roster lock, there's nothing. They can't do anything to you. If there's not a roster lock, you can cut your entire roster at any given time. So what this means is there is no risk or investment in this situation. We need to get rid of trials. Trials needs to not be a thing. We need to sell contender slots to these endemic orgs cheaper for what the OWL was. Give them the ability to develop talent, develop their brand within their own circuit, and then take that and then give the orgs a chance to recoup their losses off OWL contracts. And it needs to be set up this way. Contenders needs to basically become a quote-unquote college system with a cash value reparation for the team that gets a player sold. I have no problem with that. I think that's probably the safest bet when the players have to be allowed the chance to get into OWL. So this leads us to the fact that the contender system is flawed, and as long as you're a jackass or a douchebag, you're going to profit. And it needs to be looked at and reevaluated, because the system, I guarantee you, there will be people who are trying to take advantage of it. You need to franchise contenders just like you did with freaking Overwatch League. If you don't, you're setting a double standard. Endemic orgs won't come back. Players are going to get treated like shit. They're going to get poached all over the place, and it's going to be a never-ending fucking Deadlands wasteland. So anyway, I hope that explains some stuff. It's just me ranting a little bit, but I see a huge flaw in contenders now, and I've been thinking about it, and I'm going to think about it more. And I actually am going to reach out to some people I know and find out if there's anything being done about it, because if there's not, the people who own contender slots are about to get really rich really fast because of player turnaround and all this other stuff. And the sheer quantity of contender slots means you could move a team from an entirely different region and go prey on a weaker region. And because of that singular rule about you being rewarded X% of the player's contract you signed from your team, people will do it. People will import an entire fucking team from South Korea to play in Oceania, like Australia's region, and they'll just run the contenders table, and maybe one of them gets picked up every year, and the rest of the roster just sits there, and maybe one of them gets picked up, one of them doesn't, one of them gets picked up, one of them doesn't, and you just sit there and farm the fucking region. The contender structure is not set up, it's not secure, there's too many teams, there's not enough of a risk factor for the people who own the contender slots. They have to make no investment because the contender slots were invited / given out. It needs to be 100% to qualify for or 100% buy-in. You can't do this half and half shit. Because people who got given contender slots, I guarantee you are going to be slimy douchebags. And if my experience with organizations so far in my coaching career has anything to say about it, they're just looking to grow their brand and make a buck. I have met plenty of quote-unquote good org owners, but I have not met one that was a good person. I have met good organization owners. I have not met somebody who literally took care of me and gave me what I needed. I've met somebody who used me as a tool, as they should, in their business decisions and their business development. But at no means and by no way have I ever had an org owner who went out of their way to make sure I had everything I needed and potentially would even take a loss or sell me for nothing to get me to somewhere that I could succeed. I've never had that. I've never been signed by anybody who was like that. I've had one interaction that was close to that, and I wouldn't call it that. So I think that it's definitely something that needs to be looked at, and I'm definitely going to reach out to people, but we will see. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed my rant. Let me know about how you feel about this format of me playing while talking. So have a good one.